4 years ago, we purchased the majestic but crumbling Chateau de Purnon. It lay in peril, only a few years away from being lost forever. An enormous domain, virtually its own village. The chateau itself, an orangery, a chapel, stables, tack rooms, bakery and laundry, a mill, a shade for winemaking, animal pens and several farmhouses. Flick and I, two Australians with no prior restoration experience, began what has become one of the largest private chateau restorations in France today. But why did we do it? How much is it costing? And will we be able to save her? Well, this week we answer all your questions.
You ready, babe?
Here we go.
Question number 1 from Sarah. What made you take on this project?
Wow, Sarah, well, that's really the big question, isn't it? And I guess we're at a stage in our lives where we were both looking for a big project.
Let's be honest, this was your idea.
She always loves to remind me of this when things get a little bit tough here at the Chateau. It is true, it might have been my idea to begin with, but we were certainly looking for something that we could do together and something that reflected our shared love of French architecture, culture and history, and restoring a grand old chateau and bringing something back to its former glory seemed to be, for both of us, that sort of project.
And so I think the reason that we fell in love with Purnon was really, she was in such dire need of care. Like, if it was really now or never, well then or never, because the roof was very close to collapsing. It was leaking terribly. The interiors were on the second floor were completely destroyed, and we fell in love with her for her beauty, but also her authenticity. So in French, there's that saying "Il reste en son jus," meaning it's in its original condition, and that's really what we found so incredible about her and taking on this project, and also her incredibly beautiful natural setting. When you first jump out of the car and you arrive in front of the Grand Allées, 3 kilometres throughout the forest, right in front of you, and it takes your breath away. So I think really, like, the property is in this breathtaking setting, and what an incredible tragedy it would have been to lose it for forever.
And Hun, tell us about that first day. Tell us about the first time we both set eyes on Chateau de Purnon.
I mean, it was this awful, cold, dreary winter's day. It was the worst possible conditions that you could have seen her in. I remember walking around, no light inside, no electricity, with that big dolphin torch, and just being mesmerised by it. But it's true, as soon as we drove up, I said to you, "Welcome home." Like, why does that make me emotional now, 4 years later? We just knew. We'd seen 15 other properties, and as soon as we saw her, we just knew that she was the one for us, and if it wasn't us, I don't think it would have happened.
So a question we often get, and it was certainly asked by several of you, was Chateau de Purnon habitable when we found it?
Very good question. Yes and no. So there was one small section of the chateau that was habitable, not in a way that was very comfortable, but that was completely acceptable. So most of the chateau has been really lost over the period of time. There's very little electricity. It's very unsafe with plaster falling down. But on the ground floor, there is a small section that has a seating room, a bedroom, a bathroom, and an office, and that's where we moved into as soon as we moved in, because we really had no choice. We didn't have another home. There was nowhere else to go. We had to make Purnon home immediately, and so regardless of how uncomfortable it was or how difficult the conditions were going to be, we had to make it home. And so habitable, kinda.
It's all relative, I
Yeah,
suppose.
exactly. So we often speak about Purnon being heritage listed, and one of the questions we received was, if it's so highly heritage listed, why and how was it allowed to fall into such disrepair?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and this is really the problem for so many chateaux across France. They are very, very difficult buildings and estates to manage. They're often on very large tracts of land. The buildings themselves are obviously really, really old. The electricals, the plumbing, many of those things are sometimes a century or more old. And they're very expensive buildings to maintain. And one of the challenges in France is that because of the inheritance laws here, with each generation, the ownership of the chateau passes often into the hands of ever more branches of the family. And so you really end up with the chateau being no individual's responsibility, and the task of maintaining it financially and physically falls to many, many people, and many of them are people who don't come to the chateau very often at all. So it often becomes very difficult for families to protect and to maintain these buildings, and then when the time comes to sell them, they're often in such a state that nobody except people like us are crazy enough to purchase them.
Yeah.
So it's a real dilemma for chateaux right throughout France.
And that was certainly the case here at Purnon, wasn't it? Because there were 11 heirs, and so decision making became difficult. Everybody had different ideas. Some wanted to keep the chateau, some didn't, and it gets very complicated.
It does, yeah. So Flick, one of the questions that was asked by several people was, where do we live? Mark from New South Wales, Eric from Las Vegas. This has come up often. Where exactly in the chateau do we call home?
So the chateau has 5 floors, a basement, ground floor, first floor, second floor, and attic, and is separated into 2 wings, an eastern wing and a western wing. And so we live in the eastern wing on the ground floor, and it's like an apartment really. There is a sitting room, a bedroom, a bathroom, an office, a dressing room, and it's also the section where the formal dining room is, the salle à manger, and our current kitchen. And so it's, and interestingly, our sitting room is what used to be the Marquis and the Marquis's bedroom, a very unusual setup for the time. They shared a bedroom, oh la la, very racy, and our bedroom is actually a small room behind that original bedroom, which was their young daughter's bedroom.
And so it's quite comfortable. These things are always relative, but the electricals were still working. Sometimes we get power outages.
They don't anymore. They did when we arrived.
The plumbing, not too bad. We've had to replace a few things. Even though it's far from ideal, it's really the only part of the chateau that we could have rolled out our sleeping bag in when we first arrived.
Yeah.
So we get asked a lot about the kitchen, the original kitchen, the kitchen that we're using at the moment, and what our future plans for the kitchen at Chateau de Purnon will be.
Everyone wants to know about the kitchen.
Flick, why don't you have a crack at answering that question?
Oh, the kitchen. So the current kitchen is basically a temporary kitchen that was put into a service area, and it's in between the salle à manger, so the formal dining room, and the back window to the south here, to the park. So it actually gets beautiful light. But in there is a dumbwaiter, and so the original kitchen was actually down in the basement. It's a huge kitchen, huge vaulted ceilings, not much remains there except for the ovens. A really, really beautiful space, but completely not practical for us in this era. There's nothing else down there. It's accessible really only sort of via the moat. It's quite dark. But from that original kitchen, a dumbwaiter comes up into the service area, which is our current kitchen, and then the area was used for plating and the food could go straight out to the salle à manger. So that's what we currently use. It's in this incredibly interesting yellow and I cannot wait to have a proper kitchen, to be honest. For 3 years we didn't have an oven in there, and it's pretty uninviting place to be. But one of our big challenges in planning the interior restoration of the chateau has been to find a space that we can use. It's starting to rain. We're going to power through in the rain. Is finding a place that we can use for a modern kitchen. We've now found a space for that, and future works will start, I think, probably in the next 12 months. Stay tuned. We are planning it at the moment. It's going to be a really exciting project for us. A question we got asked multiple times: Who owns and maintains the Grand Allée?
Well, that's a wonderful question. One of the things we fell in love with when we saw Purnon for the first time was the incredible Grand Allée. This is the perspective that extends out into the horizon. It runs for 3 kilometres out into the forest in front of the chateau. And when you see it for the first time, it really takes your breath away. And the Grand Allée is owned mostly by the people who own the forest itself. We don't own the forest. The 1,000 hectares in front of the chateau is owned privately by a French insurance company, and they do a pretty good job of maintaining and looking after that forested area. But we do own the first section of it. We own the alley itself and some of the woods on each side of that alley, and we did that because we wanted to protect this view forever. And for those who are interested, it is a view that can't be grown out or built out in any way. It's protected as part of the heritage zone that covers the chateau itself, and we maintain the section that we own, and the owners of the forest maintain the rest of the portion that they own. We got asked, what is our favourite room, or the room that we're most looking forward to restoring?
So I think my favourite room, and actually I might speak on behalf of both of us because I know that this is a space that we both really, really love. So up in the attic, there is a room that traverses the entire width of the chateau. It's the only room that does so, aside from the entrance. So there's a view to the north and a view to the south, so the Grand Allée and the park, and it has a domed ceiling, and we could never work out why it was there. It's in the attic. It made no sense to us at all. And then over time, we discovered this 18th century pool table, and it sort of unveiled itself to us that this was actually the Marquis's pool room. There's a fireplace in there, there was a bell, and it's a really beautiful, light-filled, huge room. And I think that restoring this room and bringing it back will be incredible because the project will involve the restoration of the 18th century billiard table. So incredibly exciting, and so I think it has to be the billiard room.
Yeah, it really is quite a spectacular room, and it's the largest room in the chateau, the only room that has that perspective from the north and the south. And the discovery of the billiard table was just such an extraordinary thing. It had been taken apart. It was in pieces in the attic with all of the other furniture that had been abandoned up there, and it was actually our architect, our incredible heritage architect, who spotted the scalloped sections of the table that would have originally been the pockets on the billiard table. And gradually we found it piece by piece. We've put it back together, and it's there awaiting restoration, and it's going to be the most incredible project.
Really amazing. And if we're not talking about rooms or instead buildings, I would have to say the chapel is my favourite building.
And what is it about the chapel?
The chapel is just so spectacular. When you walk in, there's these huge 2 niches with large statues. There's this enormous 18th century painting of the Annunciation. There's this private balcony. The ceiling height is over 7 metres. It's a breathtaking space.
It is a very special place with incredible stained glass windows.
Yeah.
The St. Joseph one is in absolutely perfect condition.
Yeah.
And when we finally get to that building to carry out that restoration, that's going to be a great moment in our journey to save this incredible estate.
What moment has been the most exciting?
Well, there have been lots of wonderful moments, but that question's easy for me to answer at least. It has to have been that moment when we put the 2 royal busts back on the summit of Purnon's magnificent roof. So we'd found Louis XV broken into 5 pieces, smashed in the attic. We'd found the head of Henry IV, King Henry IV, hidden, abandoned really, in a cellar out in the farmyard to the chateau. Our architect had discovered that both of these royal figures had originally sat on the summit of the roof of the chateau. We had them restored, and then just a few weeks ago, with an enormous crane, our stonemasons lowered the 2 kings back into place. Louis XV gazing out to the south. You can see him perhaps behind us where we're sitting at the moment. And Henri IV, Henry IV, looking to the north. And I have to say, for the journey to bring these kings back to life almost, and to have restored them and put them back on the chateau so that we can admire this building the way it was originally designed, the way it was originally built, and in a way that no one has seen it in over 100 years. That was a very special moment.
It was pretty emotional, wasn't it? But what about meeting President Macron?
Yeah, that was a great honour.
And I decided to tell him, he asked us if we were happy here, and my response was, yes, but we haven't had a shower for 4 years, at which point he just sort of stood there and looked blankly and was like, did I really just hear this crazy Australian say that they haven't had a shower for 4 years? And so he was like, let's have a photo.
He was a bit puzzled by that exchange, but yeah, it was a great honour to be invited to his home. And to be there as part of an exhibition that included Chateau de Purnon, and he was a charming and elegant host. It was a great privilege.
Yeah, this is not one of our most exciting memories, but one of those memories that was so dramatic and we would never forget is when we arrived and had just started the restoration of the roof. We were here for quite some time before the restoration was able to start. The scaffolding went up and this ginormous storm arrived. It was its full force, like we might be getting right now actually. Power went out and we had to get up quickly into the roof to try and reduce the amount of damage that the rain did. It would come through the walls down onto the first floor and down the Grand Escalier like a waterfall. And I remember you and I standing, you outside on the scaffolding, me inside, and trying to communicate.
That's
but
right.
the force of the wind and the rain, we just couldn't even hear each other. And then you came back in, like clothes off, decided that they were just getting in the way. They were so wet and annoying. What did it matter?
Well, I need to explain to those who are viewing that the clothes were removed not as part of some pathetic rain dance, but because my clothing was just getting so wet, I couldn't function. So some of the bulkier items came off. That's true.
Those moments are nearly past us now. When with being halfway through the restoration of the roof, that we spend less and less time in the roof emptying buckets than we did in the first 4 years anyway.
That's right. So we've been asked by several people what find or artefact that we've uncovered has been the most interesting.
I think for me, I always think of the first time we discovered those, you discovered those rolled up 18th century portraits hidden under a wardrobe on the second floor. And there was this moment that you brought them down and slowly started unrolling, and you made this comment, we're looking straight back into the 18th century. And it was just this incredible moment. Like, who were these people? Were they the first generation of the chateau? How did these paintings end up there? Were they rolled up and hidden during the revolution? They're questions we will possibly never have the answers to, but such an incredible moment. And my other favourite one is far less serious than that, but each month our architect comes here for a site visit, and the meeting is usually quite intense. It's with all the heads of the companies that are working here on the restoration, and also a government representative. And he said to us right from the start, do not throw anything out, something that we took incredibly seriously. And so each time he arrives for a site visit, Tim has a pile of new finds to show him. And this one particular day, he pulled out of the pile this strange looking contraption and started to explain to all the heads of the companies and the government representative what this was. And it was a personal cleansing device, let's say that was used in the 18th century.
Well, its technical name is a cleister.
There we go.
And yes.
He went on to give a description, a demonstration, and
well, not quite a demonstration, but it was an explanation that left very little to the imagination.
Yeah. And he finished the explanation with it was used pour aider la victoire, to aid the victory, and apparently it was something that Voltaire used a lot. And how do we know that about poor old Voltaire as well? But
yes.
Anyway, what's been your favourite discovery?
Well, as always at Purnon, there's always something unexpected. We're being rained on now quite heavily. We're going to take a little break and we'll come back to you. Well, welcome back. And before the interruption, I was just about to share with you my most exciting find, and I'd have to say that it is certainly the time I came upon a Roman coin hidden or lying on the ground in our farmyard, in our basse-cour. It's more than 2,000 years old. It's a Roman coin from the period of the Roman Empire, from the period of Augustus as we'd say in English, and it's just the most remarkable thing, and I often wonder, how did it come to be there?
And I often wonder, how on the earth did you recognise it? Because it's quite, it's been sitting there for a long time. It's certainly weathered through time. It was an amazing find, hon.
It is the most incredible thing, and when I picked it up, I thought it was a button. I thought maybe this is a button off one of the hunting uniforms, and we've been trying to find those because each button has a distinctive coat of arms on it that shows the badge of that hunting club. But when I picked it up and I saw the letters IMP on it, I knew instantly this is a Roman coin. And how did it come to be here? Did someone drop it maybe in the 18th century? It was part of their coin collection, or much more likely, has it been there since the time of really just after Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, back in the at the beginning of this era?
Because we are on quite a direct route from north to south, aren't we, really?
We are, and people would have passed here during that time. In fact, there is some suggestion that our village, which is called Veru, comes from the Latin word veruca, and it was originally given its name during the Roman era. So obviously people have lived here for a very long period of time. But that is certainly my most remarkable and exciting find.
Brace yourself.
Okay, what's coming?
Challenging money questions.
Okay.
How much did we pay?
Okay, so for the chateau itself, for all of the outbuildings on the estate and the land, which is about 23 hectares, and there's, remember, more than a dozen outbuildings, there's almost 20 buildings of one sort or another on the estate, we paid in 2020 €740,000, and that's for the entire estate. 23 hectares, about 60 acres in terms that our US friends will understand.
And how much is the restoration costing?
Well, that's the big question, and in a way it's a question that's very difficult to answer. So let's start with the stage one works, the works that you can see behind us that have enveloped the chateau in scaffolding, first the eastern part and now the western part. So all of the external elements of the chateau, the slate roof, the oak frame that supports it, all of the stonework on the facades, as well as the renders themselves, all of the shutters on all of the windows through the chateau, and then all of the windows themselves, but just on the second floor of the chateau, which is under the slate roof. The statue work, so the incredible royal statues, the busts that we put in place a couple of weeks ago, and several other statues around the facade of the chateau, all of that work will cost about 2.7 to 2.8 million euros. What will the rest of the works cost? All of the interior works, the plumbing, the electricals, all of the outbuildings. The truth is that we don't know, and we won't know until the diagnostic studies that our architect does with us before commencing each part of the works. Until those studies are done, we can't tell exactly how much the works will cost. And you might say it's a bit reckless to purchase this estate and to proceed on a massive restoration when you can't be sure what the final costs will be. But I guess that's the risk of taking on the project of fully restoring a building or buildings or an estate of this size and complexity. You don't know what the costs will be, and over the years we're going to have to just work through the journey of raising the money and carrying out these works phase by phase. So I guess that's a great lead in to this question, which Holly from Indiana asked, which is, how are we paying for all of this work?
Oh, Holly.
Holly, we ask ourselves the same question all the time.
It's a big thing. So firstly, I think it's important to understand that we've committed our entire life savings to this project. This is a lifetime project for us, and everything that we have now and in the future will go towards the restoration here. Secondly, the building is heritage listed, and so we do receive aid from the government, and so some of the works we're receiving about 60%, others are 40%, and others will be less depending on the classification level of the building. We also have received other funding, from private funding through to grants or prizes that we've won. So for example, a couple of years ago we won the Mission Stefan Bern, which was a really exciting thing for us and a huge step forward in enabling us to finish the western side of the chateau. And then we've written a book. We sell slate coasters, which are made from the slate that comes off the roof. Obviously we create content here on YouTube so that we can share this journey, and by watching us here on YouTube you are contributing to us being able to fund this huge restoration. And then also we produce a weekly video exclusively over on Patreon, and actually this week, if you're interested, Tim takes us on a journey of uncovering one of the mysterious portraits that we found here at the chateau that was abandoned here when we arrived. So that will be on Patreon this week. So lots of different elements that we're trying to put together to help us to achieve our goal of actually saving and restoring the chateau and the domain. So that leads on to the next question from Shelley from New Zealand, and this is a three-part question. So the first part is the French government helping?
Well, a project of the scale of the work that we're doing here to restore Chateau de Purnon would be impossible without the support of the French government. We're very grateful to receive that support. And it's really a certain percentage of the works depending on the element of the property that we're working on. But we really want to make clear that the funding support that we receive from the government obviously only relates to those portions of the property that are heritage listed.
Yeah. So some of the internal works that are plumbing and so on isn't included.
Plumbing
in
and
that.
electricals, the new kitchen, those things, when we restored the pool, those things are not in any way covered by French government support, and frankly, nor should they be.
Exactly. So then she asked, did we know that prior to purchasing?
We did know in a theoretical sense that there was funding available from the government for heritage listed properties. But we were in the very fortunate position that prior to us signing the final contracts to purchase Purnon, we had a meeting here on site with the French government, and we sought from them an affirmation that they were interested in supporting our planned project here at Purnon. And I have to say, they were very responsive. They came to the meeting, which is very unusual, and they said that if we went on this journey, that they were very concerned about the state of the chateau and that they would be by our side. And they've been absolutely true to their word through the entire journey. The French government has been there with us, and we couldn't have done it without them.
Yeah. And so then the third part of her question is, what are the conditions attached to that funding?
Well, obviously there are conditions. We must use a heritage architect, and we're using the extraordinary Monsieur Frédéric Didier, whose participation has transformed our journey here to reawaken Chateau de Purnon. We have to also use artisans who are qualified to work on heritage buildings, and that obviously adds a little to the cost, but it means you get a fantastic final result with these traditional artisanal techniques being used by highly experienced and well qualified workers. And it also means that the project has to have some public element to it. So it's not the case that you have to open the chateau to the public for a certain percentage of the year, even though we do so on the Journée du Patrimoine. It is to our advantage that the chateau can be seen from certain public vantage points in the distance, and we think that's important, that local people can see their heritage either up close during one of the open days, or at least from a public vantage point, so that people in this region, all of whom are taxpayers, can admire the work that's being partly funded by the taxes that they pay.
Perfect.
So Kay from Sydney asks, how did we learn French? And given that Flick's French is much better than mine, I think that's a perfect question for her.
So for me personally, firstly, arriving here was a bit of a baptism by fire. We're not in a region that's very touristic, and so our village is also very small. All our meetings are conducted in French, so it's absolutely necessary for us to speak French at a level where we can conduct meetings and conduct the work here, and also socialise in the village. So for myself, my mother had us in French tutoring at lunchtimes. It's at primary school, when we're in primary school. So I had a base going into high school. I studied it through high school to the end of year 12, which really didn't help. It means that you can order a baguette when you get to Paris, but the truth is you can't hold a conversation or get much further than that. And so Tim and I were living in Paris for some time, and during that time I studied at the Sorbonne. They have a course called the Cours de Civilisation Française, and it's an intense language course. It's conducted over in 3-month blocks. You do 2 hours a day of grammar, an hour of phonetics, 2 hours of lectures. And it was really through that my French got to a level where we could start working on the project. And then it has improved over time here just by using it so much. But it is still, honestly, a long way off where I'd love it to be.
And we know that a lot of people watching us love French culture, French heritage, French history and the French language. And is that something that you would recommend to people who might be interested in learning French?
I would have no hesitation in recommending it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Obviously my language level improved dramatically while I was there, and it's a lot of fun. And some of the friends that I met during the course are now lifelong friends that are still in contact with and live in Paris and come and see us here. So
terrific.
Really nice, yeah. So little Truffe has decided to join us.
Good on you, Mademoiselle Truffe.
And so Aileen from New South Wales in Australia asked, how did we find Chateau de Purnon?
Well, there are more than 40,000 chateaux spread throughout France, believe it or not. And at any given time, several thousand of them are on the market. And if you look online, you'll find websites where you can see these chateaux listed. And if anyone watching this wants to while away a few hours, it's good fun looking at these.
It's risky because look what happened here.
Indeed, and I developed something of a hobby of looking at these chateaux online, looking at the improbable prices and what you could get for your money. And over time, it just became more and more serious. And we developed a criteria for what we were looking for, the characteristics of the property. And I have to say, visiting chateaux, looking at them as a potential purchase is incredibly fun. It's stressful, but it's incredibly fun. And we looked at 15 chateaux where we actually visited them before we came upon Purnon. It takes an entire day really to visit a chateau properly and to look right throughout the estate and to be able to start to comprehend the state that the buildings are in. But these are incredible properties. They have amazing history connected with them, different architectural styles, not just the chateau themselves, but all of the outbuildings. And you really get this incredible insight into what people's lives would have been like in previous centuries with chapels and stables. We have a boulangerie, a bakery here on site at Purnon. They really are a window back into people's lives in the 16th, 17th and 18th century, and we really enjoyed our time looking at those properties before we finally found the architectural gem that you can see behind us that stole our hearts.
Yeah, and I think also over time as we were looking at more and more properties, we started to really refine the kind of project that we were after as well. You know, we looked at properties that had already been like renovated, and so we realised that for us it was really important to have a property that was still in its original condition, and so that we were really restoring a heritage property, and it was a heritage project rather than a renovation per se.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It enabled us to really refine our goals for our project. In fact, I remember one property that we looked at, we got so close we were really about to make an offer, and we were sitting in a cafe in a nearby village talking about this incredible property that we'd come across. It had all the things we thought we were looking for, and I remember you saying, but where's the project? It's all been done, it's been restored, and we would really be just taking on someone else's project that they'd already completed. And
Buying for a lifestyle rather than the project, essentially.
Exactly, and we realise now, being here at Purnon, that it's the journey that's been the most exciting thing. The journey of finding her stories, finding how we can restore her, and then seeing those works being carried out and doing some of the work ourselves, which has just been so enriching and so thrilling.
Yeah.
So Kirsten asks, what does a typical day look like for you and I?
There's really no such thing as a typical day, but let me create a general sort of outline of what happens in a day here. So for me, the morning starts always by taking little Truffe for a run.
Yes,
so
she
we
looks
do
forward
a
to her
run,
run,
which is basically a lap of the domain. And so she gets exercise, I get time to think, and then also it also means that I have eyes on the entire domain each morning, which is quite handy given that there's always problems with the domains. Walls fall down, trees fall down, so it's great to always have our eyes on the entire property. And then the morning is normally, for me, is normally spent on administration. Surprisingly, this restoration takes an enormous amount of administration, and navigating French administration can be particularly challenging. And so generally the morning is spent getting through the administration for the day, and then the afternoon is either a project that we're working on together or separately. So Tim spends an enormous amount of time managing the domain grounds, so keeping the grounds under control and getting them back under control. At the moment I'm spending a lot of time on the interiors, so we're working on a first floor bibliothèque, which is coming along really well. And then in the evening, quite often we will spend, in France, the apéro is the big thing, and it's a very regimented catch up with friends between 6 and 8 for a drink, and so either we'll entertain here or go to friends, and then we collapse into bed and are ready for the next day.
I think what I've noticed is the incredible diversity of tasks in any given day. So it might be cutting grass, trimming hedges, weeding or managing the trees that have fallen down on the estate, cutting them up or preparing them for their next life, but also all the work inside the chateau, the plastering, the painting, the prep work that needs to be done. And one of the things that I enjoy is the moments that we get to research things here on the property. There is an incredible history. There's the oral history told to us or passed to us by people who've lived and worked here before, but there's such a rich record, a treasure trove of documents that are available online that we can find that tell us something about the history of this place, and I find researching that really, really very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we found out so much information through that, haven't we? Because for us, part of this project, aside from saving the chateau and bringing it back to life, is understanding the lives of those that lived here before us and their history.
Yeah, and recording them so that there is really a history of Chateau de Purnon written for the first time.
Yeah. So the next group of questions relates to our outbuildings. What's in them?
Well, we have about 18 outbuildings. So these are buildings other than the chateau itself. The two largest, the two communs as they're called in French, extend out in front of the chateau, flanking the cour d'honneur, one on the east side and one on the west side. And the one on the eastern side contains our bakery, our boulangerie. It is France after all, and bread is very important. There are also garages for our tractors and an old logement, an ancien logement as it's called. And this is where people who worked on the estate would have lived. One of the cooks who worked in the kitchen, one of the ground staff, etc. The other large outbuilding contains our chapel, our stables and our tack rooms. And then there are many other buildings across the estate. Some of them are really not much more than barns or sheds, and they would have contained agricultural equipment being used for storing hay and things like that. But others are actually homes for people. This was a farming estate and farmers lived here. So we have the Moulin Bigiard, which we conducted a tour on one of our videos recently. It's the oldest building on the estate, and that's part of the complex where our kitchen garden is contained. And there's an old wind turbine there and other buildings for storing some of the equipment that would have been used to look after the garden. And of course it was a farming estate, so there are chook sheds, pigsties, buildings that we used for looking after some of the sheep that were here. It's really, it's a village here on the estate, and many people lived here during the estate's heyday, and they needed places to sleep and places to work from.
And are we working on them?
We are working on some of them. We recently restored our chai, our wine barrel room. So here on the estate they grew grapes, and the grapes that were grown here were barreled and fermented for wine. And the building where that took place, we've restored the roof on it, and we're just restoring the facades at the moment. And some of the other buildings we've done a small amount of work on. Work that's urgent, restoring stone pillars or whatever to protect them from any imminent danger of collapse.
Exactly. And what are the plans for the Command West and the chapel?
So the Command West is one of those large outbuildings, and it's really in an advanced state of peril. It's had some stability issues, and there's a large modern structure at the back of it that was put up in the 1990s that's supporting it to make sure that it's in no immediate danger of collapse. But this building is going to be perhaps our most complicated restoration project. It's going to come, sadly, with a very expensive price tag, but it's a building that we're absolutely determined to save. It contains the Chateau's chapel, which is an absolutely stunning space. I know it's one of your favourite spaces. It's also a building that contains the Chateau's écurie, or stables. Hunting was always important to life here at Purnon, and here on grand estates, hunting was done by the noble families on horseback, and so they needed horses and they needed to be able to stable them and care for them. And we're really determined to save this building, and really right now the Chateau is our highest priority. Saving that is our number one focus, but as soon as that work is finished, we'll turn our mind to what we can do to stabilise and then to restore the extraordinary Command West. And that's a good in for our next question from Sylvie from Georgia in the USA, and she asks, are we going to have horses here at Purnon?
It's my dream to have horses here at the Chateau. It's also, at the moment, completely unrealistic. So for multiple reasons. Firstly, our time, all of our time is at the moment being consumed by the restoration project. And secondly, we don't have an area at the moment to house horses. As you mentioned, the stables are in a very precarious position and certainly not safe to have horses in at the moment. And secondly, we are in the process of doing a plan for the grounds of the Chateau. And in doing those plans, we'll be able to incorporate horse paddocks, but at the moment we don't have paddocks to put them either. So it's a dream, but watch this space. Hopefully it's something that the future brings for us.
I know horses have always been a very important part of your life.
Yeah.
You've grown up with horses, you've ridden horses your entire life, and I know how much it means to you to one day have horses here again at Chateau de Purnon.
And I think, gradually as we're starting to get through this first major works on the Chateau, we're sort of getting a little bit of lifestyle back. And recently I've fallen in love with a horse who's at a friend's property who trains racehorses, and so I've been fortunate enough to be going out there and riding once a week, which is something for the last 4 years there's no way we could have even sort of considered that sort of time-wise, so it's really wonderful. Yeah. So this question moves us to the inside of the Chateau. Did the plumber check the pipes for leaks?
Well, when we arrived at the Chateau, the plumbing works certainly were very old. There were leaks everywhere. In fact, many of the basins and toilets and other things really had stopped being used many years ago. And so as part of our works on the interior of the Chateau, we've really had to remove almost all of the piping and plumbing that was already in place. And we're gradually doing that, one zone at a time throughout the Chateau.
I mean, and a lot of it was visible as well. So lots of the pipes were corroded, and so it was quite clear that turning a tap on where that pipe was probably not a very good idea.
It was going to be disastrous, but we're replacing it, and as it's replaced, yes, it's all being thoroughly checked.
Yeah. And yesterday, actually, we got water on for the very first time in Purnon's first shower room. Not hot water yet, but cold water, and we are making progress there.
That's a very big milestone.
Yeah.
So we were asked several questions about the furnishings inside the Chateau. Do we have any of the existing or original furniture? Is it being restored? And is it our intention to mix furnishings from different eras and different styles, or will we just be going with vintage furnishings in the Chateau?
So when we arrived, a lot of furniture was still here that had been over time moved up to the attic because it was no longer in use most likely because of either fashions changing or the condition of the furniture. And this is really fortunate for us because it meant that a lot of the original 18th century furniture had actually been kept but was in a terrible condition. It had been under a leaking roof. And so what we did is we removed all that furniture from the attic so that we could start the restoration of the chateau, and we put it into the Commun S so we would be able to go through it when we had the chance and when our architect had the chance. And we actually did a video with our architect where he goes on a tour through there and finds some incredible pieces relating to various bedrooms and bed canopies and boiserie, wood panelling and so on. So that's been incredibly exciting. Pieces of it will be restored and other pieces are not in a condition where they can be restored but are a great reference point for us. There's actually in some of the bedrooms the original chateau beds, and we know that they're the original beds because we've actually found the original drawings for these beds as part of the chateau archives. So these are beds that were created for the chateau by the carpenters that were working on the chateau. So it is our intention, certainly with the beds, to restore them. And then in terms of furnishing the rest of the rooms of the chateau, well, that's something that's currently evolving. We're still not completely in the headspace of furnishing rooms here. We are starting to restore some of the first floor rooms, and we are planning future works for the principal rooms on the ground floor, and so the furnishing of those rooms will be an evolving thing.
Are we planning to stick with an 18th century aesthetic, or is there going to be a lot of contemporary furniture through the chateau?
So the chateau is a Louis XVI chateau, and it's a furniture style that just sits beautifully into the old bones of the chateau. And it's also a furniture style that you and I really love. So as much as possible, we will try to furnish the chateau in epoch, so pieces from the 18th century that are Louis XVI pieces. And there will also be a combination of more modern pieces because from a practical sense, you just need to do that. You know, 18th century beds are quite small, and so unless you and I decide to sleep in different beds in different bedrooms again, there will be modern pieces that we need to incorporate.
And is it easy to find those pieces, those original pieces from the 18th century? Where do you find them?
Here in France, we're really lucky or really fortunate that there are a lot of brocantes, and in this area every weekend you could go to a brocante if you wanted to, but you and I spend most of our time searching for these pieces. At Le Mans there's a déballage, which is an antiques fair once a month, and that's quite close to us. And we also spend a lot of time researching online on auction sites, and we've found some really beautiful pieces through doing that as well. So still on the inside of the chateau, something close to my heart. Does the chateau have heating?
Well, heating these old buildings really is one of their greatest challenges. And they were obviously designed in an era where people really just had fireplaces. And an old wood fireplace, by and large, is not a very effective way, and certainly not a very sustainable way of heating the vast volumes of the large rooms in the chateau. And so when we arrived, there was a small amount of heating through radiators in the section of the chateau that we live in at the moment. But it was not a system that was sustainable. It was run on essentially on diesel fuel, and it wasn't going to be appropriate for the entire chateau. So we're pleased to say that the chateau now does have a comprehensive centralised heating system. We're using a system that's a biomass system. It was quite complex to install, but it's something now that will serve the chateau for several generations to come. It works from wood chip, so we can use the wood chip from the trees that naturally fall down across the estate over any given year. And then we can chip that and use it in our biomass system. And so this is a system that's been installed that's large enough ultimately to serve the entire chateau. And as we restore each zone or each part of the chateau, we'll add radiators and perhaps sometimes occasionally underfloor heating as we go. And this will be something for generations to come here at the chateau.
Because it's not, whilst it massively improves our quality of life, it's also about the preservation of the chateau's interiors, isn't it, having an appropriate heating system?
That's right. It's not just about our own comfort, it's about protecting the rich wall coverings, the wallpapers. even paintings and tapestries and other things that may be hanging in the different rooms, if there's large amounts of condensation over long periods of time throughout winter, those delicate surfaces will decline very quickly. And so having a good heating system in place that can raise just the ambient temperature a little bit in those parts of the chateau that we're not in all of the time, that's really, really important from a preservation perspective.
Because the chateau, in winter it gets so cold. I remember our first winter here, and honestly it was just beyond miserable. And at one point the heating wasn't working and I was standing outside and it was warmer than being inside, and I just basically refused to go back inside and got in the car and turned the heater on and said we have to go for a drive. And then when we got back from the drive, I was refusing to go inside again and suggested maybe sleeping the night in the car, but you managed to talk me out of that. But it's been challenging having long winters without heating.
It does get very cold in the chateau, but the good thing is that in summer the temperature inside the chateau is actually very, very cool. And so in France, certainly in a home like this, you do not need air conditioning. The chateau is cool and comfortable throughout summer, even when it's very, very hot outside in those over those long days in July and August.
Yeah, we're looking forward to those. They're taking a long time to arrive.
So another question about the interior of the chateau: are we laying spare conduit as we roll out the electricals?
Yes, we are, absolutely. And it's something that we're working on right now as we speak. In fact, the electrician is here today doing just that. And so planning the electrical work in the inside of the chateau over multiple floors is really complex. And we've tried to ensure that we have covered everything that we need in each room, in each wing and in each level. But of course there will be things that we'll need to add as well, and so we've added conduit for what we're using at the moment, and we've provisioned for the future as well.
So another question, several people asked about our Hessian backings on our wallpapers. And one of the questions was, is it only the bathrooms which have the Hessian backing?
No, it's more actually the bedrooms that have the Hessian backing. So all our first floor bedrooms have wallpaper panels on Hessian backings, and then a lot of the first floor bedrooms have a dressing room which also had wallpaper on Hessian backings, and it's those dressing rooms that we're turning into the bathrooms or into the en-suites. And so these are en-suites where we can't have showers, so we are using beautiful baths. Some of them are the cast iron baths that we originally found here. And then the other rooms on the second floor and principal rooms on the first floor don't have wallpaper or the Hessian backing with the wallpaper, because those rooms have wooden panelling.
And what's the purpose of the Hessian backing? Why is it there?
The Hessian backing creates a void between the outside walls of the chateau and the wallpaper itself to allow air to circulate and to keep the air circulating behind the wallpaper to protect it from moisture.
Okay, so one of the reasons why the wallpapers that are there have lasted as long as they have is because of the void created by the Hessian backing and the...
Yeah, and it's a very unusual thing. Our architect hasn't seen it before. It was something that Purnon's architect obviously worked through and as you said, has been quite effective.
Okay. And one of the questions we got asked was why we didn't put a shower in that small bathroom that we've been working on at the moment with the beautiful Farrow and Ball wallpapers. And in a sense, you've kind of alluded to what the answer to that might be.
Yeah, so putting a shower in a room with wallpaper creates a lot of humidity in the room, but it also creates a challenge for us of putting a shower against the wallpaper. So originally we did look at it, could we put shower screens up against the wallpaper successfully, and we decided that it wasn't the way to go, that we were better to keep the rooms without showers and find other spaces for showers and allow us to protect the wallpapers that we're now hanging, which are the beautiful wallpapers that we've done in conjunction with Farrow and Ball. So the 5 Purnon papers, which we are just completely in love with, and they're papers that were found here that have been reimagined by Farrow and Ball. And I think one of my greatest joys has been this project, working with them and bringing these wallpapers back to life, because right from the start, when we first saw Purnon, we fell in love with her papers, and she has this incredibly rich collection of original wallpapers, and it's something that really gives me a lot of joy.
Yeah, and the team at Farrer and Ball has done a remarkable job recreating these motifs that were uncovered here at the Chateau.
And to think that they were designed hundreds of years ago and are now reimagined and back in people's homes, and we're starting to see them being hung in other people's homes, not just here at Purnon, and it's a pretty emotional thing. It's really lovely.
It's been a very special part of the journey.
Yeah. So Tyson in Seattle, Brad and Denise from Noosa in Australia, and 20 other people asked us, what are our plans for the Chateau when we're finished?
Well, when we originally started this journey, we wanted to get the restoration finished as quickly as possible, and we were incredibly impatient. We wanted the scaffolding to be up and the works to be underway. And I remember one meeting with our architect where he said to us, he was really urging us to slow down. And he said words which I've never forgotten. Both of us have never forgotten what he said. He said, we are reawakening an old lady who has been asleep for a long time, and we must reawaken her slowly. And these words, they just rang so true for us. He was urging us to be patient and to slow down. And what it's meant is that we've been able to enjoy and savour the journey of restoring this beautiful place. So instead of being focused on having the restoration finished and what is it that we might do with the Chateau once the scaffolding comes down, we've instead been able to share this incredible journey with all of you, people, thousands of people now from across the globe who are watching the reawakening of Chateau de Purnon. So a lot of people asked, is the Chateau going to be a hotel? Will it become a bed and breakfast? Will people be able to come and stay here in paid accommodation? And the short answer to that question is really no. The interiors are incredibly fragile, and we really don't see a future for her as a hotel where people come to stay in that way. But we are determined to share the Chateau. It is the heritage of all of us, not just the people of France, but this is really global heritage that we're seeking to protect here. And in protecting it, we want it to be a space that people can share and enjoy. And so we imagine using the external areas of the Chateau, the gardens, the park, as a platform for events, perhaps small cultural events or things like that. And in any event, we are determined to always be open for Le Journée du Patrimoine each year in September for that weekend of the European Heritage Days. Chateau de Purnon, since we've arrived, has always been open. It will always be open. It will always be free for people to come and visit. This is a very important part of our vision and our philosophy of what it means to be the custodians of a place that is just so extraordinarily beautiful and so important historically and culturally for the people in this region where we live.
And the domain is still so fragile, the moat walls, the terrace walls and so on. And so opening for the Journée du Patrimoine and keeping our open days for the Journée du Patrimoine means that we can take the time to prepare the grounds so that it's safe for people to visit.
And we can open as much as possible. When people come on those days, they see the bakery in operation, they can look in the chapel, they can see the stables, they can see so much more. They can come inside the Chateau and see the Grand Salon. They can see so much more than if we were trying to open, you know, every Saturday or whatever, and we couldn't secure the property in the same way.
Yeah.
So we received several questions about our life here. Where's the nearest town? Where's the nearest hardware store? How did we make friends? Things like that.
Okay.
Flick, do you want to have a go at some of those questions?
So the nearest village is our local village, which is at the end of our driveway and is a very small village of 400 people. There's no services there as such. The closest town that has some services, so a small convenience store, pharmacy, is about 8 kilometres away, and that's the beautiful town of Montséguin. And then our closest town that is a fully serviced town, banking, supermarket, a hardware store and so on, is about 20 minutes away. So we are quite remote really, but we've got everything we need within a half an hour drive.
Yep. And what about, how did we make friends?
It's interesting because there was such a spotlight on the project when we arrived. Everyone in the region had been very concerned about the condition of the chateau. The roof was about to collapse, and whilst the domain had been closed for a long, long time, really for all its life to the public, the rumour mill was swirling about how terrible the condition of the chateau was. And so when we arrived, there was a lot of interest in who were we, what were we going to do with it, what on the earth were we doing here? And there was concern, I think, about what was our plan for the chateau and what would our project be. And so a lot of people came to us, so a lot of property owners with similar properties came to us to really kind of hold our hand for the start and to help us and to provide emotional support. And those people have now become really close, lifelong friends. The village has been incredibly welcoming to us. It's a small community which we have been welcomed into with open arms and really feel part of that community. So that is wonderful. And then just through various activities as well, we've met friends. You run with a running group once a week, and we have a lovely local winery who is run by a young female winemaker who has become a close friend of ours because they do the bar au vin, the wine bar at the open days that we have here. And so we are really fortunate to have an incredibly warm, friendly, welcoming group of friends here, and it makes us very happy.
So Flick, I have to ask you, is there a day for you without work boots?
Well, no, not really, actually. We're living on a work site, and so there are hazards everywhere, and so it's quite practical wearing work boots, and we do live in them. And we have been so fortunate to partner with Hardyaker, a wonderful Australian workwear company who have been incredibly generous with not only supplying us with work boots to keep us safe, but also now a lot of our workers on site. But no, not really. I mean, there's hazards everywhere. I got bitten by a snake working out in the woods, and so we just have to keep ourselves safe and protected, and work boots are part of that.
Danger lurks everywhere here on the estate.
So last question, we've nearly made it through. How long will it take, and when will it be considered saved?
Well, I think the next big milestone for us is to see the scaffolding come down on the external part of the chateau, and we think that's perhaps a year or so away. But then, of course, there's 18 more buildings for us to be working on. And in truth, this is a multi-generational project. It certainly won't be finished completely in our time, but for us, saving the chateau itself, that's going to be an incredible milestone, because when we first arrived, really the chateau was only a few years away from being lost altogether, and that would have been such a terrible tragedy. Now, with the roof watertight and the external works so far progressed, we know that we're going to save the chateau.
Yeah.
And now really it's about saving those critical outbuildings, the chapel, the stables, perhaps the orangerie, the ruined orangerie that you can see behind us, so many other beautiful, charming, important and historically significant buildings across the domain that we're absolutely committed to saving, and we'll work on them one at a time in the years ahead to make sure that as much of this architectural gem as possible is saved for future generations.
We will do it, babe.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much everyone for sending your questions through and following our journey. As always, if you'd like to follow the restoration of Chateau de Purnon more closely, we post a daily update in our Instagram stories. We post an exclusive weekly video over on Patreon. Otherwise, just hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and we'll keep you updated here.